Well, I get to talk about an awesome topic. Everybody loves to talk about conflict. I want us to think about it. We're going to be coming to a fun time of year in church life, Vacation Bible School. Now, just think, what type of conflict have you had in VBS? So just write that in the chat. Just throw those in there in the chat. What type of conflict have you had at Vacation Bible School? Because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so this is what this session is all about. We could spend the next 45 minutes just talking about specific times when you've had conflict at Vacation Bible School. And so, Vacation Bible School, Sunday school, we're going to be doing an Easter egg extravaganza coming up in a couple of weeks. And, conflict is just inevitable. It's going to happen. We might be dealing with a disgruntled volunteer, a parent, all of those things. And I'm going to talk about them kind of in detail a little bit, but I'm more going to look at big picture things because it's going to come up. It's not if it comes up, it's just when it's going to come up. And we all have it during Vacation Bible School. So hopefully you have your sheets there, your listening sheets, and you can fill out some information as we go along. But let's talk about, what that conflict is going to look like. And so let me say some things about the types of conflict that you'll probably see at Vacation Bible School. You're first probably going to run into a conflict between a volunteer and the VBS director. You're going to have an unhappy volunteer because perhaps they don't like a policy. They don't like their space that you've given it. I like Kate who said complaining, and you're going to have that from a volunteer. So there's going to be some conflict perhaps for the Vacation Bible School director and the volunteer. That would be one type of conflict. Another type might be volunteer to volunteer. You might have the unfortunate experience where two volunteers just don't get along. They have different ideas, they have different opinions, they don't understand why a certain person is serving in that area because they don't think they have the gifts. Perhaps one volunteer says, well, I really wanted to do that role. You get the idea. You're going to have some type of conflict perhaps between volunteers. Another type of conflict you might have is between the parents and the VBS director. You might have a parent that says, I know I've already registered. Why do I have to fill out this form again? You inevitably get that. Why do we have to bring name tags to pick up our kids? You're going to have those types of interactions with parents. So that's parent and VBS director. And then you may have conflict between a parent and a volunteer. And that's unfortunate because what ends up happening is the parent, the first line, of communication is with the volunteer. And so that puts the volunteer in the middle of a conflict with that disgruntled parent. It could be, again, about policies. When a parent picks up a child, it could be about, again, back to what Kate said, complaining about something that they didn't like. They feel that, maybe their kid needed to be in a different class. Because the information was too babyish or whatever. And you could have that type of conflict between a parent and a volunteer. Unfortunate, but it happens. And then, of course, this is inevitable. You're going to have conflict with the kids. Obviously, there are going to be times of conflict that comes in contact with children because they're not listening. Two kids get into it with each other. Maybe they're in recreation and they just don't want to calm down. So conflicts are just going to happen. So those are probably the main types of conflicts that'll happen at Vacation Bible School. So let me say something now about the sources of those conflicts. There is a conflict at VBS because we're dealing with people. That's the common denominator when we looked at the types. They're all had to do with people, different types of people. And, unfortunately, until Jesus returns, there will be conflict, and VBS doesn't get that hall pass. It's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. And so it helps us as leaders, as VBS directors, as teachers, as volunteers, to know perhaps what the sources of the conflict might be. And so some of you have already writ that in the chat too, but let me just spell them out a little bit for you. First of all, the first line of or source of this conflict could be poor communication. Poor communication or miscommunication. That's another way to put it. Poor communication or miscommunication. It happens. It applies to volunteers and parents. For example, you have an upset mother. She's not understanding drop off and pickup. She says she wasn't receiving any of the information, any of the communication that was sent. And she's disgruntled because she says, well, how am I supposed to know? And then you have the well-meaning volunteer that just wants to do it right. And that volunteer might say, well, we've been sending emails leading up to VBS, and we even sent one yesterday before VBS started. And, then you have the parent that says, well, I didn't get them, and it could be something as small as this communication. And then you apologize. You might look up the information, and what you find out is that mom entered the wrong email. So little things, poor or miscommunication, they happen. And again, it's going to probably cause conflict because that volunteer is not going to know that. And so that's when we have to make sure that we step in positive ways right away. But again, poor or miscommunication, it can be and will be a source of conflict. Another source of conflict is change. And this can apply to volunteers and parents. You probably heard these phrases or will hear these phrases, especially if you do as Jan said, or Jan challenged you in thinking about your goals. Maybe there's something that didn't work really well last year and you decide to make a change. Well, you're probably going to hear things like, well, it wasn't like this last year. Or, well, I thought it worked great last year. Why change it? I remember a VBS director telling me a couple of years ago when they did the Game On. She had decided that she wanted to go with the theme. If you remember, Game On was the baseball jerseys. So instead of the regular t-shirts, she decided, well, I'm going to get those 3/4 sleeve jerseys and we're going to be like baseball t-shirts for all the volunteers. And she thought it would be fun to go along with the theme. Well, she discovered that she was wrong. She had so many of her volunteers that were upset because they didn't like the 3/4 length sleeves. I mean, it was a small change and she regretted it. But, sometimes just making small changes, really, really puts a monkey wrench in things and causes conflict. Another source of conflict can be personality differences. And this happens a lot when it comes between volunteers who are serving together. And, that's a good reason why when you're planning, that you plan early so that your volunteers can get to know each other, so that if this does happen, you have an opportunity to, to work it out so that you either put them in different areas because their personalities aren't going to mesh for the week of Vacation Bible School. And you can do it in a way that will save face. It'll be a win-win for everybody. But sometimes there are just personality differences. I've had that happen with me as the VBS director and a parent. We just didn't see eye to eye on things. And it was because our personality, we both had strong personalities. And, we butted heads a few times during the week because the parent thought I should have done this. And I said, well, this is what our policy is. And if I make that change for you, then I have to make it for everybody. And it kind of opens up a can of worms. So, sometimes there are personality differences, and that is a big source of conflict. And then another source of conflict, the last one I'll talk about, is what we call unmet expectations. And this a lot of times applies to your volunteers and your parents. You'll hear phrases like, well, I thought it was going to be like this. They had something in their mind about how it was going to look. Well, I was hoping I would get to blank. Your volunteer says, well, I thought I was going to do this. Maybe you ended up not having a lead teacher. So you've decided to have it done by your volunteers. And maybe your volunteer, all they wanted to do was just, pour glue into cups the whole week and not have to interact with any of the children and all of that. Well, that would be an unmet expectation because now you've changed things up. And again, that's when communication becomes so important in order to rectify situations like that. Maybe you hear the phrase, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. You could hear that from a parent. You'll hear some of those phrases, and it just has to say to you, well, I didn't meet their expectations because they had the idea it was going to be like this. And again, it can go back to what we talked about a few moments ago when change happens. They heard, or there's somebody said, well, it's going to be like this. And then it turns out, well, it didn't end up being like that. So knowing the types of conflict at VBS and the usual sources of the conflict, now it brings us to have to talk about, so how do you manage that? How do you manage that so that it can be a win-win for everyone? Because that is the hope. So let's talk about how to handle conflict. And so there are three things I would say. They're up on the screen already. Keep a gospel lens. Remember where you are and why you're here. I love Jan's question to every single one of us in her last session. She said, know the why. The why is we want to share the gospel, right? We want to be a gospel witness. And that's the gospel lens that you need to keep in mind. That's the lens you need to keep in mind, that you are there to share the gospel, and how does that gospel live out in you while you're dealing with that conflict. I don't know about you, but in leadership, I look at my role as the fixer. We're fixers. We often race to an issue to solve the problem, and that's all good. But we need to remember the gospel first, the solution second. This transition into being kind and not judgmental and even tempered. Those are all things that'll help us to make sure that we keep that gospel lens. And for me, it goes back to what I said at the end of Jan's session. Prayer is the key. Prayer is the key. And one of the things that when I put together my prayer requests, my prayer points, as I was sharing, I put conflicts. I put, pray that there will be minimal conflicts. There'll be minimal disagreements, that there'll be a spirit of kindness and all of that, because when it's covered in prayer, you'll be able to handle those situations, those conflicts that that are going to come up. And a second thing I would say to handling the conflict is give people the benefit of the doubt. I have a pretty strong personality, and sometimes I find it very difficult to give people the benefit of the doubt because, of course, I'm right and they're wrong. But when you're in leadership, and if you go back to number one, keep a gospel lens, then you have to realize that you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. We don't know what kind of week that parent is having or that volunteer is having. We don't know what's happening in their lives beyond what we see in the just a few moments that we see them. We don't know how their morning went. We don't know what they're dealing with at home or at work. We just don't know. And so as a believer, and again, going back to the why, right? Going back to the why, being gospel centered, we need to make sure that we're giving people the benefit of the doubt. And then that last point there, behavior is communication. If somebody's flying off the handle at you, there's a 99.9% chance that there's something under the surface that's causing the outburst. And if we, again, keep that gospel lens, that's an opportunity for us to build relationships, diffuse the situation, and and give them the benefit of the doubt, open the lines of communication, and help to rectify it, so that there can be a positive outcome, because that's what you're looking for, is a positive outcome in any situation that you have. So let me give you 6 tips for dealing with conflict, because again, as I've said from the very get-go, it's going to happen. So first, I would say, be prayerful. Again, we're asking the people to pray. You're asking your church to pray. You're asking your volunteers to pray. You need to be prayerful. I need to be prayerful. I always, as VBS director, I haven't served as the director in a while. At our church, we're blessed to have people who can step up to the plate. So I'm more I'm the behind the scenes person. I'm the one that I get to do a lot of the follow-up, because that's really my passion, is follow-up. And so, but when I was a VBS director, I always took the 30 minutes before I left to go to church, and I made sure that I spent a lot of time praying, a lot of time in a place where there was no noise, just a very tranquil place, so that when I got to VBS, I was calm. Because I don't know about you, but if I go to Vacation Bible School and I've had a lot of stimulation, my kids have been after each other, my husband, didn't get the dinner that he wanted, yada, yada, yada. I come to Vacation Bible School and I've already got a chip on my shoulder. So during the week of Vacation Bible School, I have to make sure that I'm prayerful. So I have to prepare myself. So if you want to handle conflict in the best way, it starts with you. It starts with your preparation. And so I would say, first of all, make sure that you're prayerful before you even get to VBS. The next thing I'd say is to be proactive. Nobody enjoys conflict, and it can be tempting to avoid it. But let me say this: conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. Let me say that again. Conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. In other words, if you don't deal with the situation, then it'll multiply itself. There'll become bitterness. All sorts of other things will come out of it that won't be pretty. And so it's better to deal with the situation quickly and as proactively as you can. So if you as VBS director are noticing some things, if you see a couple of your volunteers, kind of going at each other, maybe just nitpicking each other, or you notice a parent slamming the door, of their car and yelling at a child as they're, coming up to the registration table. Try to be proactive about how you handle that. And I would say in your trainings with your workers, talk about conflict, talk about what are some proactive things that they can do to help diffuse some of those types of situations, and I think if you do that ahead of time, then you're going to be able to avoid, any conflict that might multiply. So think about that. Be proactive. A third thing I would say is approach the situation with humility, because I'll tell you, humility helps disarm and it helps de-escalate. I know that for a fact. When I come in being humble and saying things like, hey, how can I help you? Instead of going in with a hard edge in my voice. I just come in calmly. And again, it started with me being prayerful at home, before I got to Vacation Bible School, and making sure that I was ready to handle people, because you're coming to a group of people that you don't know what type of day that they're having. So begin to be thinking about how can you make sure that your tone and your even your countenance is one where people know that you're here to resolve the situation in a positive way all around. So make sure when you come in, so how can I help you? That question immediately indicates to them that you're there to help them. This question, it can help take their temperature. You can find out on a scale of 1 to 10 how angry they are and how bad is the situation, just by asking that. Use phrases and words that speak to resolution. Things like, would it be helpful if, fill in the blank. I'm sorry that happened. Thank you for, fill in the blank. Can you help me understand? Again, you're wanting to again resolve, would you be willing to? So these are all phrases and questions you can use to help de-escalate the situation. Number 4 is listen. Whoop, I got 2 up there. Listen. So don't come in trying to solve the problem first. I think sometimes, especially us very leaders that are, A-type personalities, we're going to come in and we're going to just solve the situation. But sometimes the better course of action first is to listen. Hear them out until they're done. And then take a deep breath before you start launching into how you're going to solve the situation. Because they want to be heard. I don't know about you, but I want to be heard. I had a situation with a customer service person today, and I wanted to be heard. I wanted to say what I said, and the other person just kept cutting me off and cutting me off and cutting me off. And I did not feel satisfied when I hung up the telephone. So we're in a situation that we should be listening first. And then the next thing, we need to review for reflection. So by this, I mean, sometimes when people hear it from your perspective, it clicks for them. For example, my husband, sometimes when he and I are bickering back and forth on something, he'll say, so you said this. And when I hear it, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Yep. That did sound pretty dumb, because he's giving it back to me so that I can hear it from, a different perspective. He's not trying to tear me down, but he's trying to say, but this is what I'm hearing you say. And so sometimes, it depends on your tone and your countenance, how you do this, but you can help people to see it from a different perspective, Maybe a volunteer and a parent have been going back and forth. And so maybe you need to listen to both. And then you need to, be able to say it back so that they can see it from a different perspective. You know, you can say things like, just to make sure I'm understanding clearly, and then say what you think they said, and then leave it at that, and then don't say anything and let them respond back to you. Because that's, again, that's a healthy way of dealing with conflict. You know, asking them, can you help me understand? You know, why are you, you know, adamant about this? You know, help me understand how that is. And then you need to be willing to say, you know, would you be willing to da 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 da? So think about situations where you can give back to them their perspective. And then again, you can listen from their perspective, from where they are coming from. So listen first, and then make sure you can spend some time and reviewing for reflection. And then advise for the best course of action. And that's where questions come in. You know, what's the best course of action? You know, think about it from the kids' perspective. What's the best for the kids? You know, if kids are involved, what decision will be best for them? You know, would it be best for them if we switch up the rotations? Maybe they're having a difficult time with the way the rotations are. Maybe they're getting too much stimulation from recreation. And by the time they get to their Bible study class, they just can't calm down. And maybe we need to think what's best for the kids. Maybe we need to move that around a little bit, especially for little ones. That might be a solution. You know, another question might be, what's the best for the whole VBS as a whole? You know, sometimes you have to make decisions that may not be what someone wants because it's best for the Vacation Bible School as a whole. And sometimes those things happen. Maybe you have to change a security measure, you know, in midstream. Maybe something's come up and you've discovered, you know, I need to you know, deal with this in a different way. So you need to be willing to make a change if needed. And when you make a change, you need to make sure you make a communication. So if you make a change in midstream, make sure your volunteers all know, make sure your parents know, make sure your you know, all your rotation leaders know, make sure your pastor knows, make sure other people know. If you're making a decision and you're making it in midstream, make sure that the communication is there, you know, and then think about what's the best for an individual. You know, maybe you're having a child that is being overstimulated, and maybe there needs to be something that you do to help that child. Maybe that child needs a buddy. Maybe they're having a hard time being in a class with other kids, and so they need a buddy. So that might be the best course of action. And so you need to always think about that. You know, what is the best course of action that'll be a win-win for the situation? So think about those, because that's going to be a good way for you to make sure that you handle this conflict as best you can. And then finally, I would say, you know, some next steps when it comes to, you know, handling conflicts and possible outcomes, because they're whatever decision that you make about a conflict, there are going to be some possible outcomes that will happen. First of all, you've got to think about accommodating. When possible, we need to accommodate the change or the request. If somebody makes an you know, a request, we need to think to ourselves, can we accommodate this? Is it going to be a win-win if we can try to accommodate that? You know, maybe we need to accommodate you know, a volunteer who needs to come in late. You know, can we get another volunteer to come in for a half an hour because that person has to be you know, late because they have a work situation? You know, is that something that we can accommodate and be okay with the other volunteer that might be into the room? You know, can we make those accommodations? Is it a compromise that could be a win-win for everybody? Sometimes the outcome will be we have to redirect. to a new or a different role. Maybe, again, go back to the two volunteers that are having a difficult time with each other. If a solution or a compromise can't be reached, we might need to redirect the volunteer to a different role, to a different classroom. And again, I would go back to what Jan says in your planning, know your people beforehand. Make sure that you're listening to your folks so that you can avoid, hopefully, something like this. You'd probably have to redirect if you're having an issue with a child. If you're having a behavior issue with a child, redirection would be another way, another possible outcome with a child. Another outcome could be that you need some respite. If a parent or a volunteer continues to escalate, or a parent comes in a second and a third night and they just aren't happy with the way that you're running the exit of the children, and every day they want to try to do something different. Maybe you can't come up with a win-win, a resolution, a compromise. And you may have to say to the parent, let's take a break. Let's talk about it tomorrow, especially if they put you on the spot and they want you to make a decision right then. Say, hey, let me have the evening to think about it and pray about it. And then, and then I'll make a decision the next day. And that might be a good way to deal with the conflict at the moment, because again, the other person could go home and they could do the same thing, and hopefully it'll be a win-win. And then, the last outcome that perhaps could happen is you have to remove a person. I mean, this isn't ideal. This is definitely not ideal. It should be a last resort when all options have been exhausted. If you've heard everybody out, you've made an attempt to resolve a situation, and it could be with a child. You could have a child that, is just having a hard week. For whatever reason, and they just won't cooperate. And you've tried the buddy system. You've asked the parent to come alongside, and it's just not working. And it might be for the fact that there needs to be some type of a removal. And hopefully those are rare situations that you might have to ask them to leave. You hope not. You hope that that's the case, that it is rare. And I've only had to do it one time, and it had to do with a child. I always have a rule: 3 strikes and you're out. And we're very gracious. But if you come to me, the VBS director, 3 times, then, and I say that to the parent. After the second time, I'll go to the parent and let them know, if this happens the 3rd time, that's out. And fortunately, the parent understood that, and they knew it was just, for the best that the child didn't come back the next day. Unfortunate, but then, the child came back the next year for Vacation Bible School. Was great. So it's not like they never came back and they left in a huff and all of that type of stuff. Because again, I think what our heart always needs to be is we need to, want a win-win situation. And so sometimes when you're thinking about de-escalating, think about changing locations. Sometimes if a child or a parent or even a volunteer, you're having a hard time, instead of just sitting down in one area, maybe walking with them and having that conversation, remove them from the source of the conflict, and maybe that can help lower some of the attention. If needed, make sure that you have this open door of communication. Hey, let's talk about this, and don't talk about it with a whole bunch of other people, but try to make them feel that this is one-on-one time. And again, listen with them, and look at it through that gospel lens. What are we here to do? We're here to share the gospel. We're here to be kind, not judgmental. We're here to build relationships, to love them, and make sure that that's what the lens is that you're using. Go back to what Jan said in the last session: know your why. When you know your why, then when you're handling conflicts, then it'll go a lot smoother. So I hope that you don't have many conflicts at VBS, but they will happen. And I hope that you can deal with them in ways, again, that are godly and are uplifting, and that there'll be a win-win situation. So please, put any comments in the chat there if you have any particular questions. But I want you to think about, from your perspective, what will you do different when it comes to dealing with conflict based on what we've talked about tonight? Any aha moments when it comes to dealing with conflict? Would love to hear and see your chat in the chat box, just to see if this was helpful at all when it comes to sharing what's going on. All right, I have a question here. So how do we as directors decide what we handle conflict-wise versus volunteers? What do I tell volunteers if they're having issues with the kids? At what point do they get a director? That's a really, really good question. And again, I go back to what I said a little earlier, is make sure you train your volunteers. Talk to them about this. And let them know, what a good, maybe what a good baseline is for them needing to come to get you as the Vacation Bible School director. And that's what I did was when I was director. I talked to my volunteers and I said, I trust you. I know that you know how to deal with kids. They have that first relationship with you. And so if you can deal with the conflict, that's a win-win for that child there, because if you have to go up line, then it makes it a little bit more difficult. So let your volunteer handle it. And if they find that they're having a difficult time, then you as the VBS director can come in. And I would say, let your volunteer alert you, come into the space, so that you can observe what's going on. And perhaps if that child lashes out again or shows inappropriate behavior, as the VBS director, you just gently go over to the child, touch them on the shoulder and say, hey, let's talk for a minute. Again, you want the gospel lens, getting to know them. Usually what I do is I'll take them out of the room and we'll walk outside and we'll talk. I'll get to know the child, say, hey, what's going on in class? Again, what I'm doing is I'm listening to them. So I hope that's helpful, Kate. Yep. So you said gospel first and what? Relationship building, yeah, the gospel first, and then the second is building relationships, because you want to build relationships. And also when I talked about that gospel lens, I talked about, we need to make sure that we are presenting Christ to them. We may be the only Christ some of your families see. And so we got to be the hands and feet and voice of Christ. And so I hope that in any conflict that you come across, that's how you'll handle it. That you'll remember that you may be the only Christ that family, that volunteer will see during Vacation Bible School. And that's humbling. I know it was to me. It was to me. All right. Oh, yeah. I love that one. What do you do if volunteers won't come to training? Go to them. That's what I do. I go to them. In this day and age, there's no reason why we as leaders can't do little short video clips and say, hey, every volunteer needs to know this. Keep it short. And then say to everybody, here's the clip. Because you can get Zoom for free for 45 minutes. And you can go into Zoom and just, have a little script and record it, and then send that clip out to all of your VBS volunteers, and you'll be good to go. So if they won't come to training, go to them. And the other thing I would say about that too is have a volunteer booklet. You know, what are your expectations? Volunteer guide. So I always have a volunteer guide. And if you're on the VBS site there, you know, the Breaker Rock Beach site, you'll see there are several people that have done really good volunteer booklets, handbooks, they call them. So, you know, make sure you get one and customize it to what you have.